I grew up in a tiny rural town in upstate New York, a town of about 2,000 people, very agricultural, very rural. The land literally fed us. My backyard was apple orchards and potato fields. And for me, when you grow up in a place like that, you come away with certain values. And one was, a deep connection to community. Everyone wants to help each other. It was always, what can you do for your neighbor? And I think that has, continued for me to be a value. It's part of why I went into public service and elected office, and why I do the work around affordability that I do now. Um, and also just a deep commitment to the environment because it did literally feed us. And now I live out in Truckee, California, near Lake Tahoe, and again, just that connection to the land, to the natural resources all around us for, solitude, for recreation, for all of the things that it provides, to me and to family and friends, etc. Um, let's see, on sort of more of the professional side, I spent about a decade in public health and healthcare, working all over the US, West Africa, and Northern India, all on access to critical healthcare services. I did my doctoral work at UC Berkeley, and I was living in Northern India for a few summers to work on my dissertation, all on access to women's healthcare services. And that's really when I started to move more into climate and energy. I was there talking with women in, very rural northern Uttar Pradesh, and every conversation kept coming to, but we can't feed our children. 6 to 10 children was very typical per family where I was working. And we got into conversations about just crops are different than they were when they had been growing up. And I really embraced climate change as the biggest public health crisis we're ever going to face. And oh my gosh, I have to work in climate and energy. And so fast forward more than a decade now, again, I've been working in climate energy for about the past 12 years, mostly in private sector consulting, did a short stint with an implementation contractor, and then launched my own firm, Hawks Peak Strategies, back in early 2024. And that's when I would say, I was already doing more work on policy and regulatory side, but really dove into primarily the affordability side of that work as well. I've been in elected office for about 6.5, going on 7 years this December, so a while now. I mean, for me, I always say you have to be in the places and spaces where your customers, communities, constituents are, right? It really, for me, is about being really close to your different constituents, and hearing their voices and hearing their stories and then elevating those voices. I think it's, seeing things like the intersection of, housing prices and energy costs, right? And those things sort of conflating and driving people into really challenging positions. For me, being in Truckee, we've lost a lot of our residents down to Reno, for example, or down into the foothills of California, because they're priced out. And when you lose people, you're losing the social fabric of your community, right? You're losing people who don't just work in your community, but they're the folks who are volunteering for the Little League team after school. They're the folks who are giving their time to different nonprofits and agencies that provide different social services in the community. So I think for me, seeing the escalation of costs, not just in energy, but in a lot of places, and how those push people out of communities where they're an integral part and where they want to be, um, for me, that's something that, I've really seen in my role as an elected official, and something that um, our council as a whole has worked really hard on solutions, for especially around housing, just as one example, to make sure that we can retain the local, workers and their families in our communities. There are a lot of levers on this, right? And we could probably spend a whole day talking about just those levers. It's, increasing demand. There are a lot of places where a lot of states and jurisdictions that are trying to electrify more, whether it's through EVs or other types of assets. So increasing demand, you already mentioned, data center growth and what that's going to do to load as related to demand as well. Out in the western part of the country, in particular in California, where I am, wildfire risk and all of the sort of mitigation that utilities need to do related to that, and the investments that they now need to make, looks very different than it did 20 years ago. And that also drives costs and ends up often, getting shifted into or pushed into rate cases as well. That's very much my focus, is elevating customer voices in the context of regulatory proceedings and rate cases. Um, And it does look different than just, we have interveners in rate cases and they represent really, really valuable and important perspectives. And we also have opportunities to bring in direct customer voices even more. And I think there's sort of always opportunity for that. Um, because at the end of the day, customers have their own stories and just sort of a billing analysis or analyzing their billing data can miss a lot, right? A customer isn't going to come to you and say, I'm energy burdened at 6% or at 4%, but what they are going to tell you are their stories. I've done qualitative research now in regulatory proceedings in Massachusetts. I have some ongoing in Washington State right now. Um, and I'll just give you a really, an example out of some of the research I've done recently in the context of rate cases specifically. A a elderly customer who will not turn up her thermostat unless it goes below 55 degrees in her home, right? And she is doing every possible cost cutting behavior possible. She has stopped traveling. She has stopped going to see friends. So she's now socially isolating because she can't afford the gas to get there because she needs to be able to pay for energy bills at home. Um, Her housing, her rental costs have gone up. And so really, to me, it's it's a couple of things. A customer in a rate case, they're your neighbor, right? And that changes how you actually read the data. And energy burden isn't just one line item for customers. It's not just their utility bill, whether that's electric, gas, propane, et cetera. It's a trade-off engine. And people are making a lot of different trade-offs to be able to keep their power on. Those types of stories, and again, when you conduct qualitative research in a robust and rigorous way that stands up to regulatory scrutiny, then you have an opportunity to bring these stories in and to identify policy and programmatic options that will better support customers. I think a good example of an outcome of that was in Massachusetts. I testified in a rate case there, 23-150. This was back in 2024. But one of the big challenges for customers related to tiered discount rates was just, um, you know, being able to get through all of the paperwork. We know that enrollments can be really burdensome for customers. And so one of my recommendations was a self-attestation of income pilot. That came directly from hearing from customers through the qualitative work. And then the Department of Public Utilities in Massachusetts actually ordered the company to develop a self-attestation of income pilot. So that's a really big policy shift. And that came directly through research embedded in a rate case. I mean, I've done a lot of qualitative interviewing over the course of my 20 plus year career. And just recently doing these interviews, doing interviews this year in rate cases, customers would say things like, wow, no one's ever asked me about this. Like, I'm so happy to be able to share my story with you because I've never gotten the chance to. And if there's a way that this impacts, a regulator or a policy that makes it easier for me, then I'm so happy to share my story, right? I'll give another example of a customer who had an $1,800 winter bill in December. Really old housing stock, really rural, like an 1800s home, very, very old housing stock, not weatherized properly, et cetera. And she called her utility and to her and the utility's credit, they said, great, we'll get you on a payment plan. We'll get this set up. It'll be, a few $100s every month. But then she got her January bill and it was $1,500. And so she had another $300 on it. So it's just another $1,800 bill, right? So people still get stuck. They still get behind. When you have customers who are literally getting energy bills for their home that is the same as their mortgage or double their mortgage, that puts people in a really, really challenging situation, especially with bill volatility that we tend to see more in the winter, but we're seeing more in certain certain jurisdictions in summer as well because of high cooling needs. There are always going to be people who support something and oppose something. That's true of any policy and any program. And as an elected official, you have to get used to that pretty quickly. You're always going to be in a place where you're disappointing people at the end of the day as an elected official. That's, I think, one of the hardest parts of the job for me personally, because you really are, at the end of the day, I am trying to make decisions that move us forward, for example, as a local jurisdiction on our climate goals, on our housing goals, on a lot of different goals. And I have to consider the entire community. I can't just be considering selected constituents. You're always going to have people who push back on whether it's a housing development or, pick your build out, whatever it is, right? Business build outs, housing developments. We can talk about data centers. You're always going to have people who push back. And I think it comes down to listening, right? Because there are times where some of those reasons are going to be very real, right? Like you really need to understand those perspectives and how it's going to impact people. Again, it's about having those voices in the room. Um, and sometimes you have to make really, really hard trade offs, right? At the end of the day, I think also, everyone deserves housing. Everyone deserves affordable energy. These are sort of basic human goods. Again, I know that probably not everyone shares that perspective, and that's okay. Um, but that's my perspective, right? And so, how do we move the needle on those things? Well, we build more housing for one. One of the easiest ways, or one of the biggest levers to drive affordability in the housing market is to increase our supply, right? Because we don't have enough supply right now. We have more demand than supply. There are different reasons for participation gaps, right? I mean, one, just people don't know that the program exists. They haven't had outreach that has actually reached them. And there are a variety of reasons for that, obviously, but just not knowing that a solution, an affordability program, whatever it happens to be, exists for them. Um, Paperwork or applications are a barrier. Yes, going digitally fixes certain things at times, not everything, right? We have populations that don't have digital access. We have populations who are elderly for whom digital access might be more challenging. Populations of that nature. Um, Trust gaps in some of our communities, right? Not everyone is going to tell you, yes, I trust my, whether it's utility or government organization, whatever it is, completely. There are trust gaps, and that can lead to participation gaps as well. Um, I think, the extent to which, different types of assistance enrollment are embedded into places that people already go, rather than sort of expecting people to seek it out deliberately. I'll give you sort of another example of this that came to light doing some of this qualitative research, again in the context of rate cases, is customers didn't know they were eligible for a discount rate, right? They simply didn't know, because they hadn't heard about it. They hadn't received enough communication. And we know when we're doing outreach and marketing education outreach, MEO to customers, it's not once, right? It's not one channel. Like we have to, again, be in the places and spaces they are. And and that might mean going to local churches, and that might mean going to community health events or agricultural worker service points if we're thinking about the Central Valley in California, where it's really agricultural and rural. Um, those are some of the, you know reasons that I've seen in the work that I do that do drive that participation. There's fear that they're going to get a disconnection notice or actually disconnected. There's shame in that, right? There's, customers talk about getting disconnection notices that feel shaming to them, right? Harsh, sort of stern, legalistic language, things like that. So I think there's also, we could have a whole other conversation about how we actually need to be communicating with customers in empathetic ways and ways that actually drive the behaviors we want to see, not scare our customers. We're getting a little bit more towards like the elected official side. So let me kind of use that framing, for this, because it's one thing to, do qualitative research embedded in rate cases. And there are also other ways that we can reach out to our customers, or our constituents or our communities. So for me, again, putting on that elected official lens, again, like you have to be where people actually are. So yes, we have council meetings twice a month and people can come and make a general public comment, but it also starts at 5 p.m. A lot of people have families, they're trying to get kids home. It can be really, really challenging. Some people don't like to make a public comment, sort of in front of others. There are sort of a lot of different considerations there. So one thing, that I've loved doing is just doing coffee chats. And you sort of advertise, okay, I'm going to be in this coffee shop, in Truckee at this time on this date, and come talk to me about anything. Like I want your perspectives. I think another thing for me that's been really, really important, really like throughout my life, but especially as an elected official, is I want people to push my way of thinking. I don't want to be in a room where I'm surrounded by everyone who has a similar perspective or where everyone will agree with me. That's really dangerous, right? That's why we've gotten to this sort of heightened um, partisanship in our country in a lot of ways. I have Republican and Democratic neighbors. I have independent neighbors, and I'm like, your voter registration doesn't need to matter right now. Let's talk about what's bothering you, right? If there's an unsafe street crossing, okay, let's talk about that. That's something we need to address, right? We're all concerned about housing. It doesn't matter your political affiliation. You're a local business owner, you need to be able to actually have local affordable housing so that the people you employ can live nearby and don't need to commute from Reno, which is a 45-minute commute away, which is then impacting people's quality of life, again, losing sort of those social threads of our community and contributing to greenhouse gas emissions potentially just through all of that drive back and forth, right? It's a critical form of assistance for people who are experiencing all of these pressures around their energy bills, many of which you're right, they don't have control over. It's a lot of the levers that we talked about before, right? Um, I'm reflecting back on some research again from this year and customers saying things like, I got my light heat payment in December and these were interviews back in, spring, May or so, and it's just about to run out. Like this is the last bill where I'm going to get a credit for my light heat and I don't know how I'm going to pay next month. These are not customers who don't want to pay their bills. They want to pay their bills, right? These are customers who are in a really challenging financial position, who have employed every cost cutting measure, who are doing things like, you know, one woman I interviewed, like her 12-year-old son, there are days at the end of the month where it's cereal 3 days, three meals a day, right? Because the grocery budget has run out. These are people who are doing everything that they possibly can to cut their costs, to cut their energy use. They're, stuffing things in the doors and the windows. They're putting blankets over the windows. Like they're doing everything within their power. So to me, LIHEAP is that critical piece of assistance. And it's really challenging for customers again, like when you hear their stories, right? The LIHEAP payment is running down, right? It's been run down through the winter months, which it was intended to, provide for during the winter months. They don't know how to pay their bill. One of those ways is at the federal level, continual funding of LIHEAP, because again, people deserve affordable energy. And I'm obviously I was very thrilled that LIHEAP was funded again this year. Um, and yet there are still some concerns there, right? I mean, continued sort of operational challenges, administrative hurdles at the federal level, with staff basically not being there, with those staff deficiencies at the federal level, and that does strain things. That can do things like create bottlenecks. And like for me, a big thing is like, how do we actually reduce bottlenecks, right? At the sort of local level, as we think about our different organizations, how do we reduce bottlenecks for customers as they go through application processes? So I still have concerns about LIHEAP, just given, what has happened with staffing at the federal level. Obviously thrilled to see that it was funded this year. And again, I think everyone deserves access to affordable energy. So my hope is that it will be funded going forward as well.